Welcome, everyone, to Equitable, Engaging, and Energizing, a conversation on BIPOC mental health. My name is Alicia Elms. I am the manager of Next Gen Initiatives here at Active Minds, where I have the pleasure of overseeing our workforce development portfolio. Active Minds is the nation's premier nonprofit organization supporting mental health awareness and education for young adults. We are changing the conversation about mental health through education, research, and advocacy. Our Emerging Scholars are a critical part of our work, as the Emerging Scholars Fellowship is one of our longest standing programs. Additionally, this year we've launched the Nash Family Scholarship, an academic scholarship to support emerging professionals to support their pursuit of master level education in the mental health field. As we continue to explore innovative ways of improving equitable mental health access and treatment, we know one major way we can help is by supporting young adults from all backgrounds and identities in their mental health related studies. We are thrilled to hear more from our scholars regarding their perspective and research. Before we jump into the conversation, will each of you do me the pleasure of introducing yourselves to our audience? We'll go ahead and start with Brandon.
Hi everyone, my name is Brandon Bond. I use the pronouns he, him, his, and I'm a current graduate student and going into my final semester at the University of Michigan. I'm pursuing a master's in public health with a focus in health behavior, health education, and an injury science certificate, and also another master's in social work with a double concentration in global social work practice and management and leadership with a trauma-informed practice certificate. Aside from being a student, I also work as a wellness coach, engage in DEI work, conduct public health and social work research, and provide support to harm reduction and infectious disease prevention programs. And I'm here today with all of you as a fellow and graduate of the Active Minds 2022 Emerging Scholars Fellowship cohort. And I'll be discussing later on in the conversation. I'll discuss it later on in the conversation, but my project revolved around creating an integrative wellness pop-up barbershop for male identifying people of color. Nice to meet you all and looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Brandon. Brandon is always one who's pretty busy with making sure that he remains active. And following up behind that and keeping the torch running, we'll go ahead and have Sahara. Would you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi. Hello, everyone. My name is Sahara Dixon. I am a current second year now PhD student studying public health at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. I also received my Bachelor of Science in Health Behavior Science at University of Delaware, as well as my Master's in Applied Theater at NYU Steinhardt. I am an arts-based researcher and practitioner. When I work in more of my practitioner role, I work with communities, adults, children, teens, youth, and just using art as a tool for reflection, transformation, and radical healing. And in my research focus, I use art participation and cultural engagement, and just seeing how that can supplement and add to public health research. Currently, I am working on a study that looks at sexual and reproductive health inequities among Massachusetts youth. And I also do plenty of arts-based workshops. I'm a theater artist through and through, a percussionist, all the fun things. I've dibbled and dabbled here and there, but as an emerging scholar for 2022, I primarily focused my project on Black folks, Black women with body-focused repetitive behaviors, also known as BFRBs. And I'm excited to talk to you all a little bit more about that project and get to know everyone here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sahara. And like I said, she's always busy doing something and really bringing in the art lens of how mental health can influence the conversation. So it was really great. Thank you, Sahara. And our final panelist, Sophia, introduce us to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Sophia. So I recently graduated from Boston College with my BA in psychology. I had 3 minors in philosophy, medical humanities, and leadership in higher ed. So that's my 3 minors. I am a little bit different in terms of the programming. I think I'm the new Notch Family Scholarship cohort. So I'm really excited to continue being part of the Active Minds community. I was also very involved with our Active Minds chapter during my undergrad career, and that has been really empowering experience to me. So yeah, that's pretty much about me. Really excited to be here with everyone.
Thanks, Sophia. As she said, Sophia has been a part of the Active Minds community for a long time, and she just finished her time as the SAC president. So thank you, Sophia. All right, so let's go ahead and get the conversation started. So as we begin, we want to start at the beginning. Can you all tell us a little bit about how was mental health discussed in your communities while you were growing up?
I can start it off. So I guess like I guess like the community I'll talk about first is just being of African descent or within the Black community. I think mental health just first wasn't discussed in the first place for the most part, at least for when I was growing up, and in cases that it was discussed, it was either pathologized or it was kind of just like, suck it up, move on. Like we got bigger issues. We don't have time to worry about like your little brain issues or whatever, or like you're feeling sad. Keep it going. Like you still got chores to do or something. So I feel like those were like some of the main ones that I saw, and I think particularly for like my male identity, I think it was often equated to, I guess, like levels of masculinity as well, whereas like if I was more vocal or more in tune with like my mental health, it would often be perceived as me being more sensitive or weaker or sometimes like even less mature, because like I couldn't, like if I don't know, if I would cry or something, it's like, you're a baby, like why are you doing this, like just grow up and all that. So I think those are some of the kind of like socializations that I kind of grew up with within these 2 identities that I hold.
Yeah, I'll jump right in. Similar to Brandon, I feel as though, yeah, growing up in a very pro-Black household, but we were also churchgoers. So like we were going to church every single Sunday. And, growing up, it was kind of just put your trust in the Lord, very much just like that is the will, that is the way. And so we were encouraged to kind of, say how we were feeling. Oh, I'm sad. Oh, I'm feeling this way, or, I'm anxious about something, but it didn't go really much further than, did you pray about it? Do you want to talk to the pastor about it? And so it felt very much like, okay, I can talk about these things, but the resources that I feel like as a child were allotted to me were very stifled in a very narrow, I would say in a very narrow Christian lens. And just being a Black girl back then and being a Black woman now, and just kind of seeing the double standard really makes you almost want to like not speak up and not say anything, because it's kind of like, okay, well, like who's going to believe me, or, who's going to care. And so I think those were very much the themes that I felt personally in my life, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question and a really difficult one at times, because even say within like the AAPI community, Asian American community, there's such a diverse groups and diverse experiences. But just to speak for like my own experience, I actually grew up in Taiwan, so obviously we speak a different language, and secondly, we conceptualize mental health, I think, a little bit differently. And I think each community has its like local experiences and its own strengths. But for me, coming back to the US, it was very different. I was not very used to talk about my feelings in English. And I was not very used to the way how people conceptualize mental health, like some very commonly used languages here were just not part of my experience growing up throughout my childhood. And so I come to realize the importance of really understanding the power behind language and to really think about who gets to shape the dominant narrative of a community or of a culture. And so for me, it is something to navigate. And also I spent quite a while learning to understand how the mental health system just functions in the US, which is also different compared to Taiwan. So I just think it's really important when we talk about mental health that people get to own their own narratives and that we work collaboratively with the community or with the person that's in front of us, and really not, impose like a Western model or just, impose DSM-5 as a universal experiences toward everyone, because it really is very diverse. It really differs across individuals. And that's also what makes mental health so important and so, yeah, so interesting to some degree. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing that. And that's why we wanted to start with going back. So sometimes it's easier to go back from the beginning of your time for you to be able to figure out what were those messages, how were those experiences, how did they shape you, and what was the conversation like? And as we can see, the conversation is just not one-sided. It's not just one-dimensional. There's so many different layers to the conversation, and the feelings that go along with the individuals who are having those experiences, which is why we wanted to take a step back and let's look back. And so keeping that in mind about where you started, maybe not even having the language or even having the door open, tell us a little bit about how you've seen a significant positive change in the mental health communities that you identify with.
I guess I can start it off again. I think might have a cycle now. But I think one of the main things, again, we'll try to do like the both populations. I've seen, and I'm so happy that I'm seeing it too, is just like a huge shift in mindset from survival to actually living within the Black population. I think for so long, and unfortunately to some degree, like still today, we just had to survive. We just had to make sure that we make it back home every time we leave. We had to make sure that we could like pay for our bills and all that type of stuff. And it was very just like in and out, black and white. I just got to survive type of thing. But now I feel like I'm seeing a lot more people in general of color, but specifically Black people, of just like actually living and experiencing life, learning new languages, traveling, trying new foods, branching out, and just seeing like what the world can offer overall. So I think that is a huge shift that I'm seeing in people's, I guess like mental health is just like their capacity, desire, and then just recognition that there's more to life than just surviving. So I think that's one of them. And I think we're also seeing like a huge redefinition of what strength looks like for men in general too, because I definitely think that, like I said before, growing up, my mental health was seen as like a weakness or something, but now we have different groups and different conversations and programs and all this stuff that's aiming to kind of show how the importance and just how powerful it is to really invest into our minds and just how beneficial that can be, not only to us, but to everyone that we interact with as well. So I think those are two of the main positive changes in mental health that I've seen overall.
I definitely agree. I think for me, I'm Black, I'm a woman, I'm queer, I'm all these things that are, it's very much my existence, in the current landscape is very much an active resistance in and of itself. And I feel as though what I'm seeing now are a lot of folks, especially folks who are either interested or committed to doing the social justice work, interested in the advocacy, interested in making like real change. I'm seeing a lot of folks really wanting to, I guess you could say, wanting to be well so that they can continue the good fight. And so for me personally, it's so important to be able to be on top of my mental health and my overall wellness, body, mind, spirit, so I can continue doing the things that I'm on this earth to do. And I can't do that if I am feeling lousy or sluggish, or, you know, all these systems are kind of getting to me. I need to be equipped to kind of be able to face that. And so I feel like a lot of people in my circles and just kind of being on Twitter and kind of seeing how people even talk about mental health, or talk about mental health on Instagram or social media, it's very much around like, I need to be good so I can take care of my people and I can take care of myself. Being loud and proud about, you know, seeking help and having fun and doing things just for you and relaxation. And so I think all those things are super, super important. And I'm very happy to kind of see that shift from, especially in my own anecdotal life, you know, going from not being really, or not feeling like I can really articulate things that are going on, to now being like, okay, like I'm gonna tweet this off and I'm hoping and praying that it lands with people, and seeing other people kind of do the same and sharing experiences, and just ultimately this form of storytelling and getting the word out there and all the good things.
Yeah, I really want to echo your point on like social justice. And I think broadly speaking, our generation, I personally feel like when there's a shift from a more pathological lens toward a wellness or like health lens, where, you know, mental health is everywhere, and it's not just about when someone like has encountered what severity of pathology. It really is about everyone. And I think that's a really positive shift, and just having more conversation and less stigma around that. And I think the second part of it, there's much more emphasis on that how social justice is inseparable from individuals' mental health. And or I really like as how active minds like friended, how an emotionally healthy world is not possible without a just world. And I think partially maybe because like even the recent pandemic, how that has highlights a lot of existing, you know, inequities and all the social justice issue that really adversely impact some of the most marginalized communities, that we come to really emphasize on caring for the community. And what does that mean to have like community healing? How does that mean to have community resilience? And that we're not just shifting all the responsibility toward the individual to, you know, be well, or toward the individuals to be productive, that we're actually having this narrative that really cares about how, you know, how we're feeling as a community, and how the community can collectively take the responsibility to care for each other. And I personally feel like that's a really good shift, and like I would hope this kind of conversation continues even, you know, long after now we're at more like toward the end of the pandemic. But I hope this conversation continues as well.
Yeah, you all have brought up so many different lenses of how mental health, the conversation, and I think just like overall life has changed. And there are very many segments about it. So how do we go from survival to living? I will say more folks are moving towards trying to live. I don't think that a lot of us are really at that out of the survival mode, because sometimes it's really ingrained in you, because it is something that's happened over generations. But also, too, the shift of we're having more conversations because people are being more vulnerable. And we're utilizing this space and a platform of social media to find community in those spaces, which has been really helpful. So let's stick here a little bit And since Sophia has opened up the question or the topic in including social justice, can you all talk a little bit more about how social justice has had an impact on the mental health field? So give us more like real concrete examples.
I guess I can just get the conversation starting. I really love to hear from everyone's experience. Something that just like comes to mind was I work at an inpatient psychiatric like lockdown unit, and during the time of pandemic, I really see, I think, a lot of social justice issue that intertwine with individual suffering. So we've seen people, who suffer from housing instability, suffer from, not having a shelter even to go back to at night, suffering from like financial instabilities. And I've seen clients suffer from like immigrant status, and all of these things intertwined with someone's ability to first access, say, outpatient care. Do someone even have the ability to or to have the access to continued care when they need it in outpatient settings? And two, it does really impact individuals' mental health, right? So I think this is just one example of how all these different structural or more systemic issues intertwined in impacting individuals' experience. And so we obviously don't just deal with, say, oh, that's a sign of diagnosis, but really we have to think about, more broadly speaking, how as a community we can provide more wraparound services, how as a community we can really acknowledge and understand that even we share the experience as a pandemic, everyone experiences it very differently because the intersectionality factors behind that we all have such a different backgrounds, identities, and experiences, and really to take that like social, political, or even historical context into the conversation when we address the person in front of us. I think it's like a really important first step, and it's like an ongoing learning process, even for me too.
Yeah, I think that especially recently, there has been almost a shift in like, oh, mental health, like go see a therapist, talk about your problems, do yoga, do all these things. But therapy is only as helpful as it can be if we're addressing the root causes of why people are feeling the way that they're feeling. And so I like to kind of bring in, it's relevant. As an example, like this reproductive justice lens. Reproductive justice is the ability to maintain bodily autonomy and have children and not have children and parent the children in safe and sustainable communities. And, it's more than just, for example, a pregnancy, right? It involves having the money to be able to, raise that child. It involves living in an environment where that child can live sustainably and be safe and have fun. It's about transportation. It's about food. It's about, food access. It's about all these things. And I kind of use that lens with mental health as well. It's one thing to go to a therapist, but when you feel like the system, if you will, is just constantly bombarding you left and right with these, I guess you could say, oppressions, what can you do? So there definitely needs to be a systems based approach to mental health. And I think that's where the public health lens kind of comes in to aid our mental health practitioners and clinicians and researchers and all the things. So I don't think you can necessarily detach social justice from mental health. They're so important. And even just examples, seeing that now, like with everything that happened with Roe v. Wade, that's just a prime example. On Twitter, you just saw everyone just so distraught and heartbroken, and think about how that might impact them down the line, how that might impact their children, their families, their friends, and just kind of seeing that and being like, oh, like this is all related. Like this is all this work is about systems at the end of the day, not not just individual work that we have to do. Yes, we have to do the individual work, but we also have to start transforming some of these systems.
Yeah, and I think going along with that, of like these shared systems, we also have shared legacies and shared histories too. And I think that's also one of the main things that I wanted to bring back from like the previous question too, is that I've also been recognizing that we have been uncovering the truth of our history as well in these most recent years. And I think that's also really important when we think about mental health and why certain communities may have certain belief systems or actions and everything. And one thing that I did a presentation on for one of my positions was just like the history of mental health within the Black community. And one of the things that I thought came up that was really interesting was a condition, I don't know how to pronounce it exactly. I think it's like drapetomania or something like that. But essentially it was a condition that was given to people that were enslaved, um, that basically for people that were enslaved, when they wanted to run away or like when they did run away, it was considered a mental condition because they wanted their freedom and like they would run away. And the cure for that or to prevent that would be to regularly whip them. So when we think about this, it's showing how this I guess like how mental health at first is like pathologizing a natural sense of like being a natural thing that people should want is their freedom and to not be abused and taken advantage of and everything. um and then when we like translate that down the road to like the current day, we see like there is lack of trust for medical professionals. I wonder why. If you like would pathologize that, then yeah, I kind of see why that would happen. We also see people not believing in mental health, not think that it's real or serious. Makes sense why. And then also making mental health, it doesn't always feel like a healthy or welcoming concept to discuss as well. And then also, in some cases, it even like normalizes violence as a solution for like people trying to put Black people in their place and all that by using violence. And we see how this one concept, this one issue has translated to our current day and a lot of those issues that we see today. So until we can actually know our history and know how that is intertwined with other people, intertwined with, yeah, just like the experiences that we all have, it's gonna be very difficult to actually get to a place where we have an environment that is gonna be productive for developing our mental health if we don't even know the true issue of it. So it's, yeah, again, it's just really important to recognize where history has gotten us today.
Those responses were so amazing. Were you going to say something, Sahara? Okay. I was going to say, I feel like I can take this conversation and take it into like 3 different topics from what each of you have shared. But what I want to stick with it is like discovering or uncovering the truths. And I think that is so true that a lot of that now we're as a society grappling with how do we deal with the truth and how do we acknowledge the truth and what does that mean for us as a society and our health as an as a society to move forward. Mental health involved. We had that shared crises of the pandemic, but you're so right. Um, the intersectionalities of what our experiences were really changed that conversation and how we are moving through it, because we don't know where the end is. So I don't know if we can say we're at the end, we're at the beginning, we're at the middle. We're trying to navigate it with the information that we have. And so I really like that about those shared conversations and really looking at the practitioners and how mental health really has an impact on all of the systems. So moving on, we talked about the systems. I want to know more about how did you all decide to take a journey into becoming a part of changing the conversation within the mental health field?
I can kick us off. If I understand the question correctly, in terms of how I kind of got started in this work. So I shared a little bit about my, I guess, background growing up. So that religious piece, kind of keeping things in house. Don't go tell your friends that I told you this kind of things. That were just like little seeds that were planted in the house, in the household and amongst our family. But I grew up and I realized that like I had some stuff going on with me that was just not sitting right with my spirit. You know, every time I would try to talk with folks, it just seemed like, okay, like I'm not getting answers. I'm not getting answers. Why am I so different from other people? I'm not understanding, you know, I'm doing all the things that people are telling me to do, and still I feel very weird and wrong and all those things. And so as I got older, I got my diagnoses, and it was just like this like aha moment of like, oh wow. And I feel like I feel like so many people deserve to have that moment, because even no, you know, I got my diagnoses when I was what, 24. So so I was an adult. And it was one of those really like cathartic, sadder moments, but it was also like this, like, okay, you know, like I was mourning the little Sahara that did not have the support and did not have the help that she needed. But at the same time, I said, okay, like I still have so many years left. And I feel like everyone deserves, whether, you know, whether they have a diagnosis or not, everyone deserves in their wellness journey to kind of have that aha moment where things just click and make sense. And you understand, okay, this is what I need to do. And these are the people I should talk to, and starting to build my community. And then I realized, okay, there really isn't much of a community for me where I feel like I fit in. And so I really kind of got my start with the BFRB community. There's a lovely organization, TLC, the TLC Foundation for BFRBs, Body Focused Repetitive Behaviors. And so I started getting involved with them. I created the first Black support group for young adults with BFRBs. And so I think once I kind of started that, I kind of just took off, and I was like, we need to do this thing, and we need to do this thing, and we need to do this thing, because I just felt so inspired about my own story, especially during the pandemic is when I started kind of going to therapy. And that's ultimately when I got my diagnoses. My dad was very sick. I was having a little PTSD from seeing him have seizures almost every day. And so that is ultimately what kind of got me in the door. And so, you know, kind of tying it all back in, like take the help where you can get it. Whatever is going to get you in the door, let it get you in the door. Because I probably wouldn't have started therapy if, you know, unfortunately that didn't happen. And so, but yeah, I'm going on a tangent, but that's basically how I kind of got to this work.
That's so good. And thank you for sharing. What I hear is like, again, the importance of vulnerability, right? You had to be able to take that step to even go. And what you're describing of getting a diagnosis to me is like almost putting on like a fresh pair of contacts. It's like, oh, I can see, or putting on glasses for the first time, or someone having a hearing implant, where like you get a chance to experience life differently. And so it sounds like what you say, you're taking like finding yourself, but also opening the doors for others. And what's the name of the organization or the support group that you started? You have an online community, correct?
Yes. It's Imani BFRB on Instagram. We have an Instagram page. We don't quite have a website, but it's at Imani, IMANI BFRB.
Perfect. And you're doing great work there. And really building out that community for folks. So keep up the good work. All right, I've jumped in. Who's next? Sophia, Brandon's passing it to you.
Cool. I mean, that's a really good question in terms of how I feel like I will just focus on my college, like undergrad career, because lifelong story is too long. But I've always aspired to be a therapist ever since I was 11 years old. So I'm really glad I'm still on that journey. But I also felt really empowered, I think, and like called to do the work. I think during like my undergrad career, I went to a Catholic school, like predominantly white. So there is institutional struggle, but I think I also see a lot of emphasis on social justice work on campus, or when it does not contradict institutional value, which is another story. But I think I I got involved with Active Minds after my like personal journey or life experience with like psychiatric settings and stuff like that. And from there, we like started hosting a lot of webinars and panels with admins and with all the different groups on campus with the hope of one, making sure that mental health is not just a conversation within like a mental health group, but that is a conversation like across culture-based groups, across public health groups, across, you know, honor society, across any kind of groups. And the other hope is, I think there are great services on campus, but or even there are great services within the community, but sometimes there is a gap in between what is offered and what like student perceived or what we're able to access. So there was another hope that we want to bridge the dialogue or conversation between like students and admins. So we got involved in, so like I started like hosting a lot of webinars and conversation with like clinicians from the counseling centers, and they were like very responsive and very like supportive in coming to our webinars. So we like had a conversation about like anti-racism work and how institutional or like societal like racism and everything that's going on impacts students' mental health. We had a conversation on AAPI mental health, and we talk about like historically why on a societal level why AAPI community are underrepresented and underutilized services. We talk about impact of model minority myth and how that creates tension within the BIPOC population, how that impacts mental health, how that impacts, you know, utilization of mental health care. We talk about like teletherapy and like access to counseling services during the pandemic. That was like really just like very timely. And we had like so much collaboration with like other activism group on campus that I thought was really cool. Like we had a social justice town hall with the environmental justice group and like culture-based group. So like group that you would not, I think sometimes people don't necessarily think there's a strong relationship, but we're able to I think open conversation about mental health into like all different kinds of space that I thought was really cool. And I think from those kind of like opportunity, it empowered me to realize that it's not just my experience, that everyone has something to offer and everyone has that we create a shared community. And I think that is like what Active Mind does, and what like having this conversation everywhere helps a lot in both my personal journey and I think in my like career pursue. And the other thing is I got involved with like a peer text line service on campus. So we provide 24/7 anonymous non-crisis text line to the entire community with the hope, again, also to increase access to service that a person does not need to, you know, have a diagnosis, because sometimes it takes a lot to get a diagnosis, and there's pros and cons associated with diagnosis. Sometimes there's stigma associated with it. Sometimes, you know, it can feel liberating to some people to have a diagnosis. It could feel scary to some people. So we operate like a peer text line where everyone who needs a shoulder to lean on, everyone who needs like someone to listen to them can access service. And we just really, again, want to open that dialogue. And we started with the peer service and with Active Minds, run a lot of peer support training group on campus. Like we've spoken to like residential assistants. We talked to like health coach from the Office of Health Promotion. We talked to like Asian caucus that like hosted 8 Asian groups on campus and their leaders. And it was so cool to me, for me to see how we're able to kind of like provide resources on how to support peers. Sometimes I feel like we all want to support each other, but how to do it like skillfully in a way that doesn't cause counter effect. It's also a very interesting conversation to have. And so yeah, so I guess just to wrap up that, I feel like I just got really cool opportunities throughout my undergrad career, find a really cool community, and constantly learn from my peers, and that continue to like, and it also kind of like I think shape my career focus that makes me more certain that I do want to get clinical training, but I also very interested in more systemic level of work, which I think we might talk about later in terms of then how I choose my graduate program and stuff like that. But yeah.
Yeah, that's good. It's really great to have an awesome active and open community to be able to have these conversations and to be able to collaborate with those opportunities. So thank you for sharing, Sophia. Brandon, did you want to contribute to this conversation, or would you want to move on to the next question?
Sure, I can add something really quick. I don't necessarily have, I guess, like a defining moment. I think it's been kind of like a series of events that have got or helped me get involved in the conversation. I think for the most part, it's kind of just like observations. I'm usually like a very to myself, observe people and all that type of stuff. And I think I just got really tired and sick of like seeing people that are angry and sad or like hopeless and everything. So I think that yeah, just like being exposed to that, it kind of just like motivated me, like I don't want people to feel that way ever. So what can I do to like help with that? And again, like going back to like childhood and everything, like I didn't really have much exposure or education around what that even was, like why was that there and all that type of stuff. But I think as I got more education, this again goes back to like the social justice conversation too, as I got more access to education, more exposure to language around mental health, I was able to have an active role in mental health conversations. So I think that's just like another important aspect to think about, is that to be active in the conversation, you kind of need that language to be active around it. I think it was mentioned before with Sophia. So yeah, I think that's just something that I wanted to contribute. It's just that as I learned more, I was able to contribute more to the field and conversation.
That's good. As you learn more, you do. Okay, so let's go ahead and move into the next question. Can you all tell us about your research project that you conducted as an emerging scholar? And for Sophia, I want you to tell us about how, like, what program you're going into as an Ash Scholar, and just continue where you were starting before with some of your work. Sarah, you kick us off.
Awesome. So my project was titled I'm Picking Me, Exploring the Experiences of Black Women with Body-Focused Repetitive Behaviors Through Digital Storytelling and Art Space Inquiry. All big fancy words for just saying that I was working with Black folks, Black women, Black people who had or who currently have body-focused repetitive behaviors. So BFRBs are things like trichotillomania, which is like hair pulling, dermatillomania, which is skin picking, cheek biting, cuticle biting, all these different things that are sometimes bad habits for people, but they can turn into real, true disorders if they obviously start to cause some sort of threat to your livelihood, to how you live life, how you socialize, all these different things. And so BFRBs are also already pretty under-researched. You don't really hear about BFRBs a lot when the mental health conversation kind of comes up, because a lot of these things are just kind of disregarded again as, oh, like bad behaviors. So I was interested in why is it so not talked about and under-researched and under-diagnosed? And also to the flip side to that, I was really interested in why the resources that were available were not culturally and racially motivated in regards to a lot of the tips and tricks that you would find online were always most likely garnered towards white identifying folks. And so I was really interested in just learning a little bit more about the experiences of Black women with BFRBs and learn, how did you navigate this? And so a big part of the project was storytelling, storytelling as research and as storytelling as research and data excavation and using stories as data. And so I worked for about 3 months, meeting weekly with a group of folks. And we had a few workshops and we talked things out, and we did a lot of wonderful activities just to kind of get them talking about their experiences, ultimately wanting to see how racism and social cultural issues and influences really influenced how do we go about accessing not only mental health care, but mental health education, advocacy, how all those things really affect it. And so we did digital storytelling, which digital storytelling is when participants make short, about 1 to 5 minute personal stories, and it can have media, a voiceover, text, images to help tell their story. And so we did these digital storytelling workshops where I assisted them in finding stories, telling stories, producing it. And from there, I compiled all of our stories into a composite film where we screened it virtually on Zoom. Shout out to Zoom. We screened it virtually, and we invited clinicians in training, estheticians, nail techs, makeup artists, hairstylists, students, Black folks, any folks who really just wanted to learn a little bit more from these stories. And then in line with participatory based research, we really took this project as a stepping stone. What can we do with this project? It's living, breathing. And so from there, we've been pushing out some manuscripts, getting some publications, trying to get some publications, potentially presenting at the TLC annual conference, and just really seeing how we can yield these stories to really service Black folks with BFRBs, and not only just BFRBs, but also Black folks and mental health inequities. And that's generally a little bit about my topic, and I can obviously go into great detail, but just to give you a little taste.
Thank you. And we'll break it up. Let's hear from Sophia to tell us about Nash Family Scholarship and the work you'll do there.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I'm really grateful for the scholarship that as I think you mentioned earlier, that supports our pursuing a mental health related field. And so I decided to pursue a Mastering Social Work and Mastering Public Health dual degree at Columbia. Brendan, because how I mentioned earlier, I think I come to see how it's as important to address the social, cultural, political context as it is to address the client in front of you in a clinical settings, and the two are inseparable. So I really want the training that gives me both kind of framework. So that leads me into the program. And so going back to research project, I didn't really do a research project say with this scholarship, but some of my previous research also kind of shapes my journey toward where I am going for grad school. So I did a research that talks about more ethical and human care in the psychiatric settings. I did another one that focus on the impact of integrating peer mentors, so people with lived experiences, onto the inpatient unit, and how that can really strengthen the inpatient care outcome. And I think the importance of amplifying the voices of those who are impacted and those who have lived through the assistance or the experience. And another one was with the National Science Foundation, where I think was really relevant to today's discussion. I did a paper on the topic of the impact of trauma on access to healthcare service as mediated by various intersectional factors. And what got me interested in that project is, I think, like mentioned earlier, working like in outpatient, inpatient settings, I see a lot of people suffering from like accessibility issue to begin with. So it's not even just about the quality of care. We can have the best quality of care, but a person can, not having access to outpatient stable care, and a person can, going through revolving doors of ERs and readmissions because they don't have insurance, they don't have housings, they don't have all this supports that's needed in place. So that's partly what got me interested in issues about accessibility. And another part is echoing what Brandon mentioned earlier. I think we see a lot of mistrust that we first know that communities or people with more marginalized experiences are likely to have more healthcare needs. So not just mental health, but like physical health as well. But at the same time, they encounter more barriers to care. And even when we do like say access care, sometimes I do see mistrust in clinical settings. And I think a lot of this mistrust has its own like historical backgrounds, has its like structural issues in that. Like a very uncomfortable but statistic is that, like BIPOC or like Black population especially has a much higher rates of being restrained or involuntarily sent to care or criminalized in mental health care settings. So like seeing the fact that there is a reason of mistrust, but that individuals sometimes get labeled as non-complying, as resistant, or like resisting as like a lack of insights, really I think hits me. And so I want to focus my research on like kind of reshaping that narrative a little bit to instead focusing on how the structure and how the system can better respond. So we like analyze different kinds of barriers that society or the system can better address rather than shifting this blame to the individual, right? So we talk about things like cost, like, transportation, finance, and all the different reasons why a person might not be able to access care and why the person might have less quality kind of experience with the healthcare settings. And also like a really important part of that paper talks about trauma, which is like an area that I'm really passionate in. And like the result does show how people with trauma history have encountered the greatest amount of barrier to healthcare settings. And that's like across all populations, which then talks about how important it is for us to have a trauma-informed healthcare settings. And sometimes trauma is invisible, it's not being identified, and therefore we blame the individual, or therefore we don't see the need. But trauma in itself causes such a huge barrier to healthcare. So really, how do we rethink about ways that we could be more human and we can be more, trauma sensitive and informed when providing the care. It's also something that I've been working on, and hopefully that I can continue to learn and work on in grad school too. So yeah, I guess that's enough for me speaking.
Well, thanks, Sophia. It sounds very exciting. And Brandon.
Yes, so for my project, I worked on an integrative mental health pop-up barbershop program for BIPOC male-identifying individuals. By integrative mental health or wellness, I specifically focused on physical, intellectual, emotional, social, financial, and environmental wellness. So almost got everything, but a couple things got left out. But essentially I worked with 2 other units on campus, and this was also through my position as a wellness coach on the campus. So we kind of partnered together and recruited some barbers, recruited some students of color, of male background too. And we had barbers just provide free haircuts to the students. And then I helped facilitate the first half of a conversation around redefining success metrics and also childhood trauma, which was a very lofty goal for my first time going at this, trying to get men of color that don't know each other to talk about their childhood trauma. But I was able to, navigate the conversation in a way to bring in current events, like the situation that happened between Chris Rock and Will Smith. I was able to use my skills in motivational interviewing as well to facilitate that conversation, and then kind of seeing how even some of the most successful people in the world still are experiencing the impact of their childhood traumas, and like how that has translated to their responses in yeah, their adulthood life and everything. So we were able to do that. It was an amazing conversation with the participants. And then we also had an educator come in because one of our units that we were partnering with, they had a focus on trying to recruit men of color into the field of education. So this was like another way of kind of tying in like another avenue of like how to get this conversation going for our participants. And I tried to use the framework. A lot of people have heard of hurt people hurt people. So I tried to reframe it as heal people, and that if we can heal ourselves, invest in ourselves, then we can have an amazing impact on the communities that we interact with. So yeah, and I think again, some of the background for this project kind of came from my experience as a student at my university, being there for 6+ years. And yeah, I think it wasn't until like last year that I got my haircut for the first time somewhere near campus. In thinking about that and thinking about like environmental wellness, how can we feel well? How can we feel welcome? How can we feel like this university is our home if we have to leave every time we need something as simple as a haircut, every time we need something that like is food relevant to like our upbringing or something? We have to literally leave the place that's supposed to be our new home for the next X amount of years. So those are kind of some of the background aspects of it, and I'm hoping that this project will kind of just highlight the importance of starting with the basics and meeting people where they're at. Because if we can do that, then I think that's going to be a very impactful way of like thinking about accessibility, that not everybody has the capability or capacity to go out to something. So being able to meet them where they're at is super important. Also providing intentional spaces for people in general, but specifically BIPOC men, and also the importance, and I hope the next step of the wellness journey of like creating culturally tailored programs and services for people as well. And then lastly, kind of just like reimagining spaces for BIPOC people and also recognizing the intersection of our wellness. I think a lot of times we think about the intersection of our identities, but it also happens with our wellness too. So hopefully that can be a next step in the conversation of inclusivity and equity on mental health. But yeah, that's kind of my project real quick.
Thank you to each of you for answering. To my ESF folks, it has been really great to work with you, but also to hear your projects. One of the things that I want to highlight that Sahara said when she presented her work that she didn't say here is that when talking about this work and learning about it was that folks who suffer, or I won't say suffer, who's diagnosed, to give me the right language if I'm saying it wrong.
Yeah, who's diagnosed is good.
Diagnosed with BFRBs, is that sometimes it can be embarrassing. And I think when you humanize it in that way, it brings a drive home for folks about why this is left outside of the conversation and why it needs to be brought back in. So thank you for highlighting it there. And then Brandon, you provided us the video about the history of barbershops and like the role that it takes, and the conversation that spun from that was so great amongst us as a group. But that was also the importance of your work too, is really diving into the importance of barbershops as it relates to culturally relevant work, like where the conversations happen, but then also the impact that it has on people. So to you too, I say thank you for bringing this conversation forward. And then Sophia, we're so excited about where you're going. You've already done some work, you've already begun the work, and we're just so excited to see where you're gonna take NASH. Although we're right at time, I want us to do a quick 30 seconds before we leave So make this quick, as in give us one tip on how we can begin to normalize the conversation on mental health for BIPOC folks. So very quick, one tip.
Okay, I'll start. I think, like I said, take the help where you can get it and continue telling your stories. There's health and healing and power in your stories, and own it.
Thank you. Who's next? Sophia.
Okay, I'll go. I think two real quick things. One is like we mentioned earlier, to authentically share your story and walk your own journey. The second thing is a quote from my English professor. She shared a quote with me. It's by Audre Lorde that says, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare." So self-care, not like a quick fix, but really a way how you want to live and how you want the community to live. I think that's really important too.
Oh, that's good. Thank you. And Brandon, you got to follow up with that one.
Yes, I will try my best. I would say like one thing is to just really body it, body mental health, make it a part of your everyday language and actions and experience. And I will also add a quote that I don't know exactly who it came from, but I heard it from a classmate who heard it from someone. His name is Nicholas Buckingham, so like I'll try to give him credit for that. But he also said that what he heard was the people closest to the issue are the closest to the solution. So I think that's really important, that when we are thinking about next steps and the actions, that we invest in the people that are closest to the issue. So yeah, I really hope that that is a good way to wrap up.
That was perfect. That was good. Thank you to each of you again. And thank you all to everybody who joined us today. And thanks to our folks at Active Minds who've been very helpful behind the scenes in making sure that this YouTube Live went off well.